Amy Longford, Head of Planning.
Andrew Jones, Development Management Area Manager.
Joanne Chase, Solicitor of the Planning Committee.
Richard Ray, Paralegal.
Richard Williams, Democratic Services.
Thank you, everybody. And can I, at this stage, welcome Councillor Laura Wright to the committee. Laura's just joined us following Sarah Birch going back to Cabinet. So welcome, Laura. And we formally welcome Amy as our new head of planning. So well done. We go to the agenda now. Do we have any apologies?
No apologies received, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Any declarations of interest? Councillor Wright?
On item 4A, the land at Park Crescent, I have a pre-existing relationship with one of the objectors. I will, as the ward councillor is unavailable, I have agreed to read out something on their behalf today, but I think it's a prejudicial interest, so I prefer to recuse myself from the vote, if you agree, Chair.
Okay, if that's how you feel, and Joe is comfortable with that, so yeah, read out that, and we'll take it from there. So that's declarations. Can we go to the minutes of the previous meeting, please? Can I have a proposal that we accept them, or does anybody have an amendment? Councillor McConnell, Councillor Powell. Can I remind everybody online that you must keep your camera on at all times? If you want to say anything, do it in the chat, please. Excuse me. Oh yeah, and Councillor Easton. Oh, you're in the chamber anyway. It's safe. You were on the screen. Yeah. Okay. Just to remind everybody, keep your cameras on. If you disappear at any time or have to leave, can you inform us that you're leaving, and make sure that you do not take part in the vote. And members, there's been a lot of late correspondence with regards to several of the applications here today. Has everybody seen the late correspondence? Satisfied that you've seen it? With regards to the first item we have, which is application DM 2023-01341. There's been some late correspondence just given to you. Most members won't have had the opportunity of reading it yet, so I'm going to break for 5 minutes to give everybody the opportunity of reading it. So apologise to people at the back. But it's important that everybody has the opportunity of looking at all the information before us, before we make any decisions. So we'll have 5 minutes, so we'll come back at 2:10. Right, it's 2:10. Can everybody, those online, put your thumbs up if you have. Can everybody have the opportunity of reading that now? Yeah. And in the chamber, everybody read it? Okay, thanks very much.
Chair, before we move on, have we received apologies from Councillor Bond? She was hoping to join us from Australia, but obviously there's security problems. So if not,
I-
we accept apologies.
We've recorded that she's on holiday, so
Okay,
we'll put that down as apologies. In that case, then we'll get on with that particular application, 01341, and Andrew.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone, and those joining us here and online. Just wait for the slides here on screen, one moment. Oh, that's the first one there, yeah. So this is a full planning application for the erection of one two-storey dwelling within the town of Usk, and it would be accessed from Maryport Street. You can see that there along the western flank of the site. To confirm to you members, the application is presented to you this afternoon at the request of one of the co-ward members. So I'll just go through the presentation. I know that we didn't visit the site yesterday. Our site visit was undertaken late last year. So for any members that weren't at the site at that time, and particularly as we have a new committee member as well, I'll just run through the presentation slides that you'll see on screen now. So the first slide here shows the application site in red. The next slide will show you, that's the site area. You'll notice there within the red line boundary, there are three grey polygons there, the coach house, office, and one which is unlabelled, that was a garage. All three of those buildings have now been demolished and the site cleared of those buildings, just for background and context. So this next slide shows the proposed site layout. You also see on the right-hand side there some elevational drawings of some of the buildings that were previously on sites that have now been demolished, and that's the proposed site plan on the left. I think there's a better view of that. So that's the buildings there. You can perhaps see at a better, more reasonable scale. And the site plan here, you can see on screen, that's the one I wanted to show. So that you can see there to the north and to the east, there are some distances measured there in respect to site boundaries and third-party properties. Just turning then through to the next slide. So those are the floor plans. This would be a 4-bedroom property, and those are the first ground floor plans. The elevations of the dwellings, that's the view from the front. You would have views of that when travelling along Maryport Street. And that's the side elevation there. That side is the side to the south. And that's the rear elevation. And then on the right-hand side of your screen, that's the side elevation that would face on towards the properties of Church Street, which are located to the north. So just some further context. This actually is an older photograph here. You'll see in the background there one of the buildings that has now been demolished, but that's the view of the site from Maryport Street. There is also a view on the next slide of a photograph taken from within the site, and you can see there its relationship with the surrounding built environment. But just leave it on the summary slide for now. So the officer's report, as you'll have seen, members, provides a detailed assessment of the material considerations and relevant policies. So what I'll do is just provide an overview of these only. In terms then of our material planning considerations and the principle, as I said, the site is within the development boundary of the town of Usk, within which the principle of new build residential development is acceptable, subject to detailed planning considerations. And as set out in the committee report, planning permission has been granted in 2022 for a single dwelling here. However, it is noted that the red line boundary has increased since that time, and now also included within the application site is land to the rear of number 29, Maryport Street. In terms of placemaking and in terms of design, the dwelling has been subject to various amendments and revisions, including those following comments received by the Council's Heritage Officer. The site is therefore within the Usk conservation area, and as I sort of briefly alluded to earlier, you would experience views of the site and of the dwelling when travelling along Maryport Street. A condition is proposed to agree samples of materials prior to any development commencing, which is considered appropriate, giving any sensitive location and for new build development within the conservation area. However, following the amendments that have been made, the development is considered to be of an appropriate scale and design in this urban context. Turning then to one of the key material planning considerations of this application before you today, members, is that of residential amenity. And significant concerns have been raised from third parties, particularly those along Church Street. And officers do recognise that the redevelopment of this site is challenging, given its location close to other dwellings. However, regard is given to the context of the site, which is within a more densely populated part of a town centre. Section 6.6 of your officers' committee report sets out the distances to these neighbouring properties, so I won't repeat those verbatim. They are recorded in that document. Concerns have been raised that the development would have a harmful overbearing impact on neighbouring properties, as I say, specifically with those to the north along Church Street, and the fact that those distances don't adhere to those set out in the council's supplementary planning guidance. And certainly that point is understood and it's well made and well. However, the SPG, supplementary planning guidance, is there for guidance purposes. It provides additional guidance to planning policy. And indeed, in the supplementary planning guidance, it does note that each development site has different characteristics and that not all the requirements as set out can be met. And I think the one thematic thing that the SPG does highlight is the importance of site context. And as noted, the planning history here is of relevance, and extant planning permissions are material planning considerations. And in this instance, while the application site, as I've explained, expanded, the position of the dwelling of that now proposed and of that previously approved, whilst different, are comparable in terms of assessing impact. And the construction of that dwelling is a realistic fallback position given the time to commence this planning permission, which was determined in March 2022. So that would give it a 5-year window to commence development. With regards to privacy, no windows would be positioned on the side gable facing towards the Church Street properties. And whilst first floor windows are to be provided on the rear elevation, officers are of the view that it's reasonable to conclude that such is the angle that this would not give rise to unacceptable overlooking. Therefore, the matter of residential amenity has been considered at length and in depth. Of note, criterion D of policy DES 1 sets out the development will be required to maintain reasonable levels of privacy and amenity of occupiers of neighbouring properties. For the reasons I've provided and an overview that is contained in more detail in the officer report, the impact on balance in respect to this material consideration is considered to be such that it would accord with the relevant policy requirements. Just to note, members, I'll just quickly, before I move on to highways matters, if you can just move to the next slide. If we need to come to it at any point, like I said, there is an extant consent on a slightly smaller site. That is shown on screen now. As it is a material consideration. So if that's needed, if members are unsure of the alignment of that and how that relates to this, for reference purposes only, that is on screen now, if that would aid for context and an understanding of what was previously granted. But to confirm, the red line boundaries are different, and the development has moved closer accordingly. In terms then to highways matters, the site would use an existing vehicular access, as was also consented for the previous permission, and the council's highway engineer does not have grounds to raise an objection. The site provides on-site parking and turning, and whilst third parties have raised, and right to do so, the issue of context within the access and its adherence to modern standards, again, officers are aware that this is within the historic part of the conservation area, and additionally, the fallback position of the use of that access for a single dwelling. So on that basis, officers' advice to members is that there are no grounds to withhold planning permission on highway safety grounds. In terms of active travel and other modes of transport that should also be considered, the site is in very close proximity to the town centre, including walking distance to a nearby convenience store, and is close to other associated amenities and services by way of non-private motor vehicle transport. In terms of affordable housing, as is required by policy S4, a Section 106 agreement would be required to secure a financial contribution, and this is set out in the heads of terms in the committee report. In respect of flooding, I note this point is highlighted in some of the very recent correspondence you've just received. To confirm, the site is within a flood zone C1, and it is acknowledged that the site area has increased. However, the council's statutory consultee on such matters, that is Natural Resources Wales, offer no objection subject to condition. As a point of clarity, I would note that the document titled Flood Consequence Assessments at 33 Maryport Street, that's prepared by Ashfield Solutions, dated July 2024, is included, if members are minded to approve, is included in the list of approved plans and not the document listed currently by JBA, dated August 2020. So that updated report would replace that, and that would also take effect and be updated in condition 5 accordingly. So on that basis, members, the application is presented to you with the recommendation for approval, subject to the detailed conditions and the signing of the Section 106 agreement as set out in the officers' committee report. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And we've got the local member here, Councillor Keir. So if you'd like to address the meeting now. You've got 4 minutes, and chew the sum up at the end if you want them. If you go over the 4 minutes, I'll eat into you 2.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Can I firstly thank members for visiting both the applicant's site and the neighbouring property of 8 Church Street on the back of my request to Andrew Jones on the 23rd of September for this application to be discussed at full planning on the basis of my view that there is a loss of amenity space for 8 Church Street. And I note that my comment in that regard was not included in the officer's report. I note, and as Andrew has just highlighted, the officer's report says the redevelopment of this site is challenging, given its location close to the other dwellings. And I note previous planning approvals for 2020 and 2022, which were approved prior to me becoming a local member, and I would have raised similar concerns then as I do now. The process too has been challenging with 3 applications for this site, and I believe there has been some confusion on the contributing reports within it. I don't believe this is a simple replacement residential dwelling, and indeed the acquisition of gardens from 29 and 31 Maryport Street have added to this. But in short, Chair, I am objecting to this proposal on the loss of amenity space for 8 Church Street in particular, concerns regarding the loss of parking and additional street parking, and access to and from the site. With regards to the first aspect, loss of amenity space for Church Street, members commented on the valuable site visits both to 33 Maryport Street and 8 Church Street, which I think ably demonstrated the proximity of this application to 8 Church Street. I do disagree with the officer's comments, and I am of the opinion that there will be a loss of privacy, in particular, although one could argue on noise as well. I don't believe that the revised plans and the reduction in scale do avoid an adverse impact on the neighbouring properties and remain overbearing. The distance from the boundary of the application to 8 Church Street per the report is 2.5 metres, and my understanding is that there should be at least 10 or 15 metres in certain circumstances of separation. There will, of course, be occasion for small flexibilities that Andrew has highlighted, but here, for me, the difference is too big. My view also is that the 45-degree rule is not met, and my assessment is that the bedrooms of this application can overlook upstairs of 8 Church Street, which I assume to be bedrooms as well. My opinion is that the application will allow the house garden of 8 Church Street to be overlooked, accepting that the other garden will, which is slightly detached from this property, is already overlooked. My understanding again is historically there were no such windows in the existing building that was demolished that was that was in existence. Also, for me, it is not clear, given my concerns on proximity of this development, how the building proposed will affect neighbouring properties by way of light. With regards to loss of parking and additional street parking, illegal parking for this area of Maryport Street is now out of control, in my opinion, due to the failures of parking enforcement teams, where the sheer volume of traffic is seeing daily double yellow line parking and on corners, so that members of the public can use the one-stop shop and indeed the MCC hub or post office. My understanding from this application is that 31 Maryport Street has lost its 2 allocated spaces that were included or not lost in the previous 2 planning applications. So this will mean more on-street parking in an already crowded area. I'm disappointed that the Highways report fails to bring these aspects to members' attention.
You have 4 minutes. You can keep going.
Thank you. I'm just coming. Access to and from the site. My observations are on a practical use basis, and the display exiting the site is inadequate, and the current height of the walls, albeit partly demolished, restricts visibility for existing drivers, giving rise to making it dangerous for pedestrians and wheelchair or pram users, or on a very and increasingly busy pavement, given the proximity of the MCC hub and post office, as well as the one-stop shop. Highways have not made comment, but I do feel reliance on the existing entrance and effectively disused for such a long time. I think the building hasn't been used since 2010, is a disappointing approach, and it should reflect current localised issues and the circumstances I've mentioned. Should members be minded to approve this application, then I do believe that this aspect should be looked closely again, where changes should be made on safety grounds. In closing, Chair, I further add that the officer's report refers to us Town Council being to recommend the approval, but I believe that relates to February 24 and to the previous plans. I don't believe there are any current comments on the existing plans before us. I regret, therefore, that I do disagree with the officer's recommendations, and I repeat that I am unable to support the application in its current form for the reasons I state, and I note the words of guidance, context, and on balance, and for me, on balance, I'm not able to recommend approval, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Keir. We don't have anybody from the town council, but your comment about the previous recommendations from them is noted. We have an objector who has registered to speak, Lisa Hopkins. And Lisa, if you want to speak from up there, you're more than welcome. You've got 4 minutes.
Okay. Thank you for letting me speak today and present my objections in person. I live in number 8 Church Street. I've lived there 3 years, and I've recently refurbished and extended my property. I only have a small area of courtyard outside of my back garden, and I will be severely overlooked from the bedroom of this property. And can I just comment that neither of the previous extant plan permissions met the standards to do with privacy, parking or access, and they were still approved. My principal objection to the application are it does not comply with the minimum privacy standards, it does not comply with parking standards, it does not comply with access standards, it does not include any reference to how waste will be managed to meet the Manual for Streets and MCC standards, it does not comply with TAN 15 for a site in Zone C1 of Natural Resources Wales Development Advice Map. Incorrect flood consequent assessment documents and therefore data are included in the application and do not cover the whole application site and therefore should not be considered appropriate. Important information is missing from drawings, as in parking and turning. Vehicles should be able to turn on site to leave in a forward gear. Incorrect documents are referenced in the officer's report, but the planning member has corrected that. The highways officer comments are based on a replacement dwelling when it is clearly a new dwelling. Conservation area planning approval was not complied with for the demolition of the 2 existing buildings. I would ask that if the committee cannot vote to refuse the application today, that I ask them to defer the vote and ask the LPA to provide perspective drawings to clearly demonstrate the impact of the proposed dwellings will have on neighbouring properties, namely 2, 4, 6, 8 and 10 Church Street, as the proposals do not meet the minimum privacy standards, to provide a daylight assessment to demonstrate the proposed dwellings' impact on 8 and 10 Church Street, to provide a noise assessment to demonstrate the impact of the dwelling on the amenity of 8 Church Street due to its close proximity and orientation, instruct the highways officer to assess the site on the correct basis of it being a new dwelling, not a replacement dwelling, and that the highways officer carries out the assessment consistently with other infill sites as per 4 Ash Street and the Willows Bound Street as regards parking for existing dwellings, to instruct the officer to assess the site against the shared access driveway standards and not a private drive, and to include a risk assessment for users of Maryport Street. To assess the site for waste and recycling collection provision. And I'd also like to know why they recommended approval for a new dwelling in that area of the flood zone that does not comply with TAN 15. And I think that the team at MCC who are responsible for the hub should be allowed to comment, considering that there is a provision for permeable paving to be excavated directly adjacent to the hub, and therefore it will affect their foundations. I would also like to ask the committee to ask the LPA to explain why they consider enforcement action is not required, as the existing buildings were demolished in contravention to the approved conservation area
Seconds left, Lisa.
permission. Basically, I think enforcement action should be taken because the planning condition wasn't met in an archaeological aspect, and that was a pre-start and pre-demolition option, what's it called, condition. And my neighbour Sarah Williams, who has also moved, who's new to move into number 10 Church Street, would like the opportunity to submit her objections because the new proposals overlook the whole of her garden, which the officer's report incorrectly reports. That's it, please. That's it, thank you.
That was pretty well timed then, wasn't it? Thank you. Before we go back to officers for comment on that, we have Chris Rabiotti with us attending for the applicant. So, Chris.
Hi there. Good afternoon, and thanks for allowing me to say a few words. Without repeating the presentation of Case Officer Andrew Jones, I'd like to put on record and clarify that the site has already an extant permission for 2 houses. I think Andrew was talking about all the drawings are for the 1 house, but there's planning for 1 house and another application for 2 houses. In my opinion, the objector is making unreasonable, persistent, vexatious complaints in respect to this planning application, a view which is supported by a most recent online objection, where she is encouraging the council to take punitive action against me. I find this alarming, as I've consistently followed the correct procedures in line with the permitted planning consent since acquiring the site and liaise with the planning officers accordingly. I have made several amendments to the scheme following discussions with the case officers. Furthermore, part of the recent online objection has been blacked out, which I can only assume is due to the unacceptable personal or derogatory comments against me. Just to put on record, there are 2 spaces at the back of 31 Maryport Street. There's no parking being taken from 31 Maryport Street, and the access to 29 Maryport Street was pedestrian access only. A car couldn't drive around there and access the garage. It was purely pedestrian access only. I trust the committee will see past these unfounded objections. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Officers, Andrew, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the speakers as well. I think in terms of some of the points Councillor Keir has made, the only one I think I'll respond to that overlaps in with some of the comments that was raised by the third parties in terms of the need for additional information in terms of daylight and noise assessment. Officers' view is that there's sufficient information before you today, members, to make a planning decision based on the submitted drawings. It's acknowledged that the flood report, as I set out in the presentation, if members are minded to approve, should be updated in the list of approved plans and therefore in the planning conditions. And the officers' committee report again acknowledges reference made by our highways engineer to a replacement dwelling, but as concluded there, notwithstanding that, this is a scheme that is considered to be acceptable in highways standards. Mention has been made to modern standards of access and splays and that guidance, but as I've said in the presentation, we need to balance that with the context of the site, the visibility splays of properties in that area, and the fallback positions of consents that could be implemented using that existing access arrangement. To confirm, in terms of there's some slight contradictory in some of the information provided in terms of C1 or C2. This is to confirm in flood zone C2. We have gone back previously, I think it's version 6 of NRW's comments. That's most recently in late December with the updated information. They have seen all the information, and as our statutory consultee on matters of flood and flood risk, including flood risk to third parties, they raised no objections subject to conditions. In terms of waste and recycling, as we know, the council has a curbside collection policy, and there's, as I said previously, enough information to inform the planning decision. I don't see that there's any grounds to request any further information on that point. To confirm also, as a matter of clarity, the MCC hub that sits to the south of the site, they have been consulted throughout. Each phase of reconsultation has also included the hub. Turning to some of the points, and it's a slightly separate matter to the application before us, but as you've seen through the planning history, there was previously conservation area consent given to for the demolition of the coach house and the office building, and the point has been raised that why didn't MCC enforce those conditions? Well, ultimately those conditions have all now been discharged. Based on the information provided to us in terms of when it's alleged that those demolition works would have taken place, they would have taken place based on that, if that's correct, prior to those conditions being discharged. But the information that's required by those conditions was ultimately provided and was subject to consultation with what is now HENEB, but previously Glamorgan Gwent Archaeological Trust, and the information was deemed acceptable. So in terms of enforcement action, which would be via way of a breach of conditions notice, the requirements of such a notice would be for information to be submitted to discharge those conditions. Ultimately, that has happened. Planning enforcement process is not a punitive process. If the information and requirements to condition has been satisfied, then there would be no grounds to pursue that against any individual or individuals. So I hope, therefore, I've covered the points raised, but if there are further queries, members, through the course of the debate, I'm happy to respond to those. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And we'll go to members now, and Councillor Bryn.
Hi, thank you, Chair. I just wanted a bit of clarity if that's okay, because I could find none in the documentation that this is, because it did seem to be parking retained for 31 outside of the red boundary, but there was no, I see no indication of this in the documentation that this is a shared, in fact, a shared drive, and therefore that access will be maintained post the post erection of this dwelling, and also that the rights of way, albeit on foot, to number 29 will also be maintained in the future post construction of this building, and wondered if that could be conditioned that those two accesses are retained after the build, if it gets permission today. Diolch.
Thanks for that. Andrew, do you want to, we'll deal with these individually now.
So is it possible I could just ask Councillor Bryn, apologies, Councillor Bryn, could you just repeat the two points you're requesting clarification on? Continued pedestrian access for...
Yeah, there was within the documentation there was an old map saying that there is pedestrian access to number, it said 19, but it's actually, I believe, number 29, but that's not on this map, and it does look like there is space behind there outside the red line boundary that would belong to 31 for parking. Therefore, I'm presuming that this drive will actually be shared access, but I could see no reference to that in any of the other documents, and I wondered if it is in fact a shared access with 29 on foot or bike and 31 by vehicular access, whether that should be conditioned that is maintained post construction.
I'll come back later on if that's okay to Councillor Bryn's point, if there's any other members with any other queries.
Yeah, sure. We'll go to Councillor Hells.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Yeah, Councillor Marion Howells. I'm a joint ward member for Llanbadarch and Usk with Councillor Keir there. I live on Maryport Street, further down the road, and therefore I know this road very well. The development lies between one of our one-stop convenience shops, the one-stop convenience shop, the Usk Hub, the library and the post office, and opposite a Children's Little Explorers nursery and the district nurse centre in the old grammar school. It is a busy pedestrian section of the town, and the one-stop shop being a popular stop with children and parents after school. Visibility for vehicles leaving this property and crossing the pavement is poor, with a high wall and a fence on either side obstructing driver's view. For pedestrian safety, what provisions would be made for the vision displays will be appropriate for vehicles for safety onto the exit road? And also, as Councillor Bryn has just mentioned, parking is a premium at this location because of the facilities I previously mentioned. However, prior to this application, number 31, a three-bedroom property, had off-street parking, as did 29 with its own garage. The development doesn't appear to take into account the loss of spaces for these two properties, and to avoid overburdening the existing parking in this already busy section for future occupiers, will off-street parking spaces be provided for these properties on Maryport Street, which I believe that's already been addressed with.
Yeah. If there's any other points, members, then I'll just look into that, make sure I give you the right information.
Anybody else want to raise? And you've got nobody on my list at the moment. While we check on these things, going to make sure we got absolute clarification. Just Councillor Bonfield.
Thanks, Chair. I'm really struggling to support this application today. You know, we need to take the knowledge of the local members and also the people that it's going to affect. You know, we've got policies there to protect amenity, and to protect privacy. You know, policies DES1 and EP1 are there for a reason, and I can't help but think that this application is not compliant with those policies. It is going to affect neighbouring amenity and privacy. So I don't think that I can support this application today because I don't think it is fully policy compliant. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor McConnell.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just following on from Councillor Bromfield, sort of quite specifically, and I'm sort of struggling with this. The distinction as to whether it's a replacement building or a new building, I think, is sort of irrelevant in that the plot is clearly suitable for infill and has clearly been a building there before, so it'd be quite appropriate for the availability of housing in that area to be supplemented in that way. The comments which are coming back, I'll be interested in the safe access and ingress to that property. I'm satisfied about the flood risk. It is about the compromise between guidance and the reality. I think it'd be very natural for people. If I lived in that area, I wouldn't want I wouldn't want more housing bordering my house. But I'm living in the middle of a town and there's a big gap there, so a house is going to be built. Something will be built there. It's that compromise between how close that is. And so I would really welcome another trot through. I've looked at it, but another trot through how near the proposed properties are to the properties bordering, and the calculations made on light, in particular, to those properties. So just a refresh of that while I sort of clear my mind about those difficulties would be appreciated. Thank you.
Well, of course, planning permission already exists on the site anyway. Amy, as Andrew is digging into that, are you coming back, or has Andrew done what he's doing?
Yeah, I'm just waiting for clarification. Apologies, couldn't hear me. I do apologise. Just waiting for clarification on one point. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the points made in terms of some of the additional information that's been talked about and discussed in terms of, I suppose, primarily light and noise are some of those issues. Obviously, that is at members' discretion, but I would repeat the officer advice that we feel there is sufficient information to inform a planning decision to be made. If we could just bring up the slide, I think probably the red line boundary that the site plan is. Yeah, in terms of any, say, pedestrian access that I think Councillor Brennan, if I've understood, outside of the red line, I mean, anything outside of the red line boundary we can't control. Similarly, with any sort of prescriptive sort of rights of access over land are outside of our remit. You'll see as you come into the site there's a fence line. Oh, Amy, your cursor was just exactly on. So there's a fence line there as you come into the site. That runs the whole length then down. You see some gates shown there as well, which would sort of demark the plot and the planning unit then. There is land outside of that land there. It's outside of the application site if parking was to be created. So any parking outside of the red line boundary is outside of the remit of this planning application to condition to secure, but there is space there. So again, highways have not objected on that point. I would suggest it is appreciate the parking stresses are noted, etc. But this is close to town centre in terms of applying current policy thinking in terms of putting the motor vehicle first. I remind members that we should be looking at other modes of transport as the priority, and the site is located in close proximity and walkable distances to various services and amenities also. So there is some land available, but see that outside of the red line boundary, we couldn't condition to secure parking for any other existing residential dwellings.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Bin, you've spoken once. Was it just a quick point?
It was just clarity. I appreciate that parking is outside the red line boundary, but it would require egress over the drive that is inside the red line boundary, as would the right of way. Even though it's accessing a house outside of the red line boundary, it too would require egress, albeit on foot or on bike, up the red line boundary driveway, thereby creating a shared drive. And I'd wondered if it was worth conditioning that, if that is a requirement for them to access those two spaces through this planning application. Thank you.
I think, again, it's any right of access that's afforded to any other parties would be subject to their own private legal agreements. Had the parking offering been within the red line boundary, then yes, we'd be recommending a condition that that's implemented by a trigger date, for example. But if parking is provided for other units outside of the scope of this application, then the shared access, then I'm not sure what a planning condition would be achieving. Any shared access rights for other parties to use that access would be a private legal agreement. I'm just trying to find the previous planning permission where the parking was provided on site. I suppose the planning point there really is that the site was using the same entrance and splay for that number of properties and vehicles as is now proposed. I note the concerns with visibility splays coming out of here and its relationship with pedestrians, mobility scooters, prams, etc. But development has been approved in that. There has been previous land use in there that would have had vehicles exiting and entering Maryport Street at that point along the carriageway. So specifically with the point of access and safety, I think the planning history of historical uses and the extant planning consents, it would be very difficult to suggest at this stage now that access is not appropriate or safe for use for a single dwelling.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Nobody else has indicated they want to speak on this. Councillor Keir, you used all of your 6 minutes up, so I'll ask Richard to put the voting function up, please. We have an application before us with a recommendation for approval. Can I have somebody prepared to put it forward for approval and a seconder, please? Councillor Butler and a seconder. Councillor Wright.
Councillor Eason, please could I ask you to refrain from voting due to your absence? Pardon? Just nothing.
Amy wants to come back in on that.
Thank you all. Just to confirm that the officer recommendation is for approval subject to the conditions in the report as amended with condition 5. Andrew will have the specific wording and the replacement of the flood consequence assessment in the plans list.
Yeah, the matters are interlinked. So it's updating the drawing list to reflect the 2024 flooding work, and therefore any document relied upon in a planning condition should be listed in the list of approved plans. So it's removing the 2020 document from both the list of approved plans and the condition and replacing it with the 2024 latest survey work.
Okay, thanks for that, Andrew. We've got the, while I find it a minute. So we've got the voting function just come up. So if everybody can vote now, please.
So that vote's been approved, 12 for approval, 2 for against.
Okay, thanks very much for that. We will move on to application DM 2022-01525, which is the construction of a proposed bungalow with parking on land at the rear of 11 Park Close in Abergavenny. Andrew again.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I just wait for any members of the room to just make their way out. And we get the presentation up on the screen.
Councillor Wright, as you declared, you've got a presidential interest in. If you'd like to read that, and then you can leave.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just go straight into it. So there are a number of material considerations here for objecting to the proposed build. And 2 of these are from statutory consultees. From Highways, there was objections by Mr. Benjamin Lewis of Highways Development Control, initially lodged in 2022, repeated and enlarged upon in March 23. The width of the proposed shared driveway access is less than that required by Welsh Common standards, which the site cannot provide. Mr. Lewis identifies the proposed access arrangement effectively causes 3 properties to share the same access. Highways insist on the requirement of a 4.5 metre width. The applicant needs to secure access rights in perpetuity over their neighbour's land and drive, i.e. allow shared access for 3 dwellings. If this is not secured, access to the new dwelling and associated parking will no longer be available. Highways consider the proposed parking arrangement inadequate and access egress of moving vehicles poses a threat to driver and pedestrian safety. In light of the above, one exception of Welsh Common standards being passed in allowing a 3 metre wide access, cited by Stephen Travers of Rockfield Architecture. Is this the DC 2016-00714 cited in 14th January Planning Committee report? This does not set a precedent. Comparing Land Registry Deeds WA 310952 Appendix 1 and DM 2022-01525 location plan, there appears to be a boundary dispute, i.e. ownership of the blue hash section in the driveway between number 10 and number 11. So ownership and access rights in perpetuity should be resolved before approval is granted. Second point is biodiversity. Objections online on the 13th of January 2025 by Mr. Daniel Humes from Modern Life Biodiversity and Ecology. The proposals do not comply with PPW 12.2. Considering the size and scale of development, a level of habitat creation should be included. Further supported in the online objection dated 13th January 25, citing this area is identified by MCC as a green corridor for nature, as demonstrated by recent addition of the orchard to the green area outside the properties. Building on this site would have a detrimental impact on biodiversity and is not in line with the Council's commitment to addressing the nature and climate crisis. Further consideration, the proposal to remove the entire hedge and replace with a closed boarded fence will further damage local biodiversity. The applicant does not own the entirety of the hedge, and the owners of 12 Park Crescent do not give their permission for the removal of the portion of the hedge. While the ownership of the land is a civil matter, in this instance it does impact on the following environmental considerations should planning be removed. 1. Hedgehogs frequent the gardens. Hedgehog gaps may promote access, but they do not replace the food source. And 2, the hedge is used by pipistrelle bats, protected species under Regulation 43, the Conservation of Habitat Special Regulation 2017, and Section 19 of the Countryside Act 1981. There is no evidence the bat impact survey has taken place, and removal of the hedges to be avoided so as not to affect their feeding behaviour and foraging routes. Hedges are used for sightlines, navigation and foraging, and pipistrelles roosting beside number 12 Park Crescent frequent the garden. The wild hedge provides nesting for a variety of birds, and biodiversity issues should be resolved before approval is granted. How am I doing for time? Okay, so 4 questions that the people would like answers to, please. So number 1, who is the author of the report posted online 7th January 25, attributed to Kate Bingham, recommending approved subject to Section 106 agreement? Number 2, does the author have the authority to overrule the objections of the statutory consultees of MCC's, Highways and Modern Life Biodiversity officers? Number 3, are MCC Planning Committee prepared to grant an application over land which is not owned by the applicant and which will go against their own commitment to address the nature and climate crisis? And number 4, if MCC Planning Committee does not refuse the application today, would they defer until further reports are available from highways and biodiversity officers, and also consider the petition from neighbouring properties which offers further objections? Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, councillor Wright. If you can leave the room now, then we'll. Laura, can you just repeat question 3 a minute?
Sorry, let me just fetch it up again. Number 3 was, are MCC Planning Committee prepared to grant an application over land not owned by the applicant and which will go against their own commitment to address the nature and climate crisis?
Okay, thanks a lot. We'll leave all of those points and well, you can pop them up in your presentation or whatever. Right then, Andrew.
Yep, thank you, Chair. I'll answer those sort of 4 points directly then at the end of the presentation. Although I suppose technically, question 3 is worded is a question for committee as the determining party, but I'll run through those once I've finished going through the presentation. If we just get that on screen. Okay, great. So yeah, this is a full application for the erection of one single-storey dwelling to the rear of an existing dwelling at Park Close, Abergavenny. And to confirm, the application is presented to you today, members, due to holding objections from both MCC's highway engineer as well as our in-house biodiversity officer. So a number of members weren't unfortunately able to make it on site yesterday. So for the benefit of those who weren't able to make it, as well as anyone else observing, I'll just run through the slides on screen for you now. So that's the application site location edged in red on screen. You can see it's corner plot in the top right-hand corner, effectively, of Park Close. It's a larger plot than others due to it being a corner plot. Let's move into the next slide. So this is the site site layout plan. You'll see there that's the area of land hatched in blue at the site entrance. There's a right of access over that was discussed. The red areas or red pink areas denote the parking spaces that would be shared amongst the existing semi-detached property and then the new dwelling proposed to the rear. And you can see just to the south of that is I think it's a blue dotted line that would demark how the plots would be divided as separate standalone dwellings. The next slide then shows you the floor plans and the elevation. So it would be a facing brickwork finished property, single story, providing 2 bedrooms. And that's a view. So the host dwelling, as it were, is the left-hand side. Yep, thank you, Amy. On your screen there, and you can see the access where that black car is parked that would lead to this rear of the site. There's another view. Finally, the other thing, probably the only other photograph you've got yet is looking back into the site. However, that is taken from the public realm on Park Close. So I'll just run through then. So as I said previously, as is always the case, the officer's report provides the detailed overview. So I'll just provide a sort of summary of some of the key points. Principally, the site is within the development boundary for the town of Abergavenny, and so within which and under other policies, the efficient use of land is encouraged, subject to detailed material planning considerations. So in terms of those and our consideration and your consideration as determining today, members, specifically to placemaking and design, as I mentioned briefly, this is a corner plot within the estate, so it does enjoy, as do the other corner plots, certainly at the top of the site, larger plots, larger space than some of the other houses where those plots are longer and narrower. And accordingly, on that basis, officers are satisfied that the plot would lend itself to subdivision and the ability to site and house a second dwelling with reasonable amenity space around each. And officers consider that would be an efficient use of land within a development boundary as per the thrust of the current local adopted development plan. The proposal dwelling for a single-storey dwelling would sit to the rear of the established building line, and the use of the brick finish would reflect that used elsewhere, primarily at ground floor level on Park Close. So, subject to the conditions set out in the report, the officers are of the view and would recommend that the development is considered to be an appropriate design and an efficient use of land within the development boundary of the town of Abergavenny. In terms of residential amenity, the dwelling, as stated, would be single-storey, and therefore no upper floor windows would be present that could afford any potential loss of privacy or amenity. And members that were on site will have noted that there are other residential properties in the context area surrounding the application site in proximity to the proposed dwelling. So the plans before us are for a single-storey dwelling, and therefore, as I said, there's no upper floor windows. And as such, the development as proposed would not give rise to a loss of privacy. However, officers would recommend that if members are minded to support the application to approve, that an additional condition, which I think, Amy, if you could just move on the next slide, an additional condition be attached to remove normal permitted development rights set out under Part 1, specifically classes B and C, which relate to alterations and extensions to the roof, so things like dormer windows, which under permitted development you can erect quite large dormer windows to the rear of the property without the need for planning permission. So as a way and as a reasonable and justified planning condition, if members were minded to support this, officers would recommend the wording suggested there. So that's not all Part 1 permitted development rights, but specifically targeted at alterations to the roof and additions to the roof. So that the wording of that suggested condition is on your screen now. In terms of green infrastructure, biodiversity, as I set out at the beginning, there is an outstanding holding objection from the council's in-house ecologist, and this is predicated on the basis that the proposal at present only provides ecological mitigation, and this is by way of nest boxes, and that ecological enhancement still needs to be delivered. So accordingly, if members are minded to support the officer recommendation, a standard condition requiring full details of a scheme of ecological enhancements be submitted to and agreed in writing. And that suggested wording, it's a very sort of standard and frequently used condition, is set out on screen now. But I think it is important to note that the council's ecologist is not requesting further survey work, which couldn't be conditioned and can't be conditioned, and therefore the suggested condition would overcome the matters raised in the current holding objection. Turn then to another significant issue with the site that's been articulated through the comments raised in what was read out by Councillor Wright, and that is highways. And as set out in the introduction to the application, the council's highway engineer maintains a holding objection, and this is centred on two key broad issues. Firstly, the width of the shared private driveway, and secondly, the ability of vehicles to manoeuvre within the site and to enter the carriageway safely. So the highway engineer objects to the width of the shared axis, which is 3 metres, which is 1.5 metres less than the widths set out in the Welsh Common Standards. I think it is important to note that these standards are not adopted, and therefore, whilst helpful guidance, they do not hold the same weight as either adopted policy or adopted supplementary planning guidance. And this point has been made clear to us through appeal decisions and the weight afforded to them by planning inspectors. So officers with the view that on balance, given the scale of the development, which is for one single two-bed property, and given that scale, that a width of 3 metre is acceptable for that one additional property. Officers do note the concerns with the layout and the highways engineer's observation that this could lead to the parking provision not being fully utilised, resulting in cars needing to park on street. However, again, this must be balanced with the context of the site. Other properties around Park Close do not have the ability to turn within the site and leave in a forward gear. And the highway also, given its layout and its orientation, does not lend itself to vehicles travelling at excessive speeds. This is also balanced with the site's proximity to Abergavenny town centre, which are accessible by modes of transport other than the private motor vehicle. So this, members, requires a careful balance of planning judgment. The concerns raised by both local residents and the highways engineer are fully understood. However, officers feel on balance that the matters relating to the parking and access of a private motor vehicle do not cause such harm to wider highway safety so as to warrant refusal of planning permission. Finally, in regard to affordable housing, as this would result in the net increase of one dwelling, then as set out in the heads of terms, a financial contribution would be required to affordable housing in the local market area. So in conclusion, this does require planning balance and judgment, but officers' advice is that it is recommended for approval with those 2 additional conditions, which should still be on screen now, and also subject to the signing of the Section 106 agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. We've got nobody putting their hand up at the moment.
Do you want me to come back in, Chair, on those questions?
I knew about what happened. Do you want to come in now, Andrew, or shall I take the?
Yeah. So just to answer directly the questions that were set out in the statement that was read by Councillor Wright. Who is the author of the report? Well, the author of the report is the case officer, as are all the reports in front of you today. And that's, in this case, that's our Senior Development Management Officer, Kate Bingham, who is the author of this report. Does the author have authority to override statutory consultee's advice? As far as statutory consultees go, where there is an identified statutory consultee, in this case, highways and ecology, whilst we are duty bound to consult them and to take their advice and to take that into consideration as part of the determination, we are not duly bound to follow that advice. It has to be considered and fully and taken into the planning consideration. But if we feel there are material reasons to override that, then as officers, we can make a recommendation that's contrary to that statutory consultee advice, and that's for the very reason why that provision is built into our constitution, so that applications there come to committee in those such scenarios. In terms of RMC prepared land not owned by the applicant, the information before us is that there is a right of access over that area of land that was hatched in blue to enable, as I say, that it would be only 3 metre wide shared access, but that right of access exists. And the matter then is of the width of that 3 metres, which is well rehearsed within all the correspondence you've read, and our officer's view on that is clear. In terms then of the matters in terms of climate change, and that leads then into question 4, if MC does not refuse, would it defer for further highways reports and ecology reports? There's no further, the matters raised by the council's ecologists can be addressed through a standard and simply worded planning condition that meets all of the required tests for the imposition of planning conditions. And in terms of further reports for highways, the officer advice to you is that we don't need further reports. The comments made by our highways engineers are clear. In this instance, we have chosen to take that into the planning balance and arrive at a recommendation that is contrary to their advice. But we are able to do that, and in that scenario, it comes to this meeting for your decision, members, to grant or not planning permission.
Okay, thank you, Andrew, and Councillor Riley.
Thank you. I wonder if we could see the photograph of the fronts of the houses again. I'm really sorry, I wasn't able to go yesterday, so I didn't have the benefit of seeing it. But I am really concerned about a driveway that's 1.5 metres narrower than the sort of standard guidance. And I'm really concerned maybe about the safety of children in those properties in such a narrow driveway. Sorry, I'm just trying to keep track of the photographs. But yeah, 1.5 meters is a significant amount to a car driving through, which isn't, I'm guessing doesn't happen at the moment. And those are two front doors that you would expect people, but children also to be coming and going through. And that does seem quite narrow. I am concerned about the safety of the driveway through, if that makes sense. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Riley. We'll see what Councillor Butler's got, and then we'll come back on that.
Sorry, that's my simple order. Thank you, Chair. I do have some concerns about biodiversity, but I am content that conditions being put in. What you can't see from the photographs, and you can only have seen if you've actually visited the site, and I think there is relevance here, is that in front of this house there is, or this driveway, there is a green area where recently an orchard of rare pears and apples has been planted. And then beyond that, then there is the park where there are large trees. So this area actually is it's a flight path for the bats. So I do have real concerns about biodiversity here. However, that area at the back at the moment only has, as far as I could see yesterday, a lawn, which is, pretty not biodiverse, and a hedgerow at the back. And it's the hedgerow that concerns me the most. Although it didn't look in particularly good condition, that will be an area where the bats will be feeding. And the house itself seems to be sitting right on that hedge. Is the hedge going to disappear? Is that where a fence is proposed? It's not quite clear to me. So that is a concern. My other question really is, and I know we have no control over this at all, but I haven't been able to see this anywhere. Are they proposing to have an air source heat pump and solar panels on this property? It would be very nice to see if they were considering that. So that's an observation, really. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Chair. Like Councillor Riley, I'm seriously concerned about the access and egress from the premises. There is no turning point in the parking provision. That means everything that has to be reversed out, which with the proximity of the front doors does raise serious safety issues. I'm not so caught up with the biodiversity side of things. I think that can be conditioned, but the access is particularly poor, and I'm likely not to be able to support this because of that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bryn.
Yeah, thank you. I too am really concerned about the access and egress, particularly as their vehicles would be unable to turn and therefore would be potentially reversing back in the dark, potentially past two front doors. Yeah, so that is concern. Also, I could see no existing plans on the portal indicating if the hedge is to be lost. But the building does look like it's right up against the boundary. Therefore, could you confirm that this shared hedge is to be uprooted, and also potentially if the build is to be built right up to the border, could it potentially then cause harm to the rest, the other side of the hedge that is rooted in the neighbour's garden because because it's been built right on the boundary. So that's a concern for me, really. I wondered if we could request that the shared hedge is not removed and that the building is built slightly within the boundary, because it does seem, it looks on the plans to be built right on the boundary, which is concerned me a little bit. Okay, diolch.
Thank you, Councillor Prin. Before I take any more, can we go back to officers on those points?
Yep, thank you, Chair. I mean, yeah, the points raised in terms of the width and the concern that was started by and raised by Councillor Riley. It's 1.5 metres below these standards that highways have referred to. Again, all I would advise members in terms of applying those standards is that they're not even adopted supplementary planning guidance. I appreciate 1.5 metres going from 4.5 to 3. It is, which sounds like a significant drop there, but these are standards that aren't adopted by the council through the supplementary planning guidance process, or certainly not referred to within the main body of our planning policies. And I mean, ultimately the decision is for you to take, members, but I would also, as I did earlier, raise the fact that that status has been highlighted to us in terms of our reliance on those through the planning appeal process, and that observation being made by planning inspectors. In terms of some of the biodiversity matters, we're just checking through now the submitted information. I'm taking my cue from the green infrastructure statement that's submitted in support of the planning application, stating that no soft landscaping will be affected by these proposals. Suppose my response to that would be twofold. As we've noticed, some of the vegetation there is not in a great state in terms of maintenance. There is an opportunity, if members feel that further soft landscaping would be beneficial to this site, to be an improvement to the site, but that is a soft landscaping scheme. Its agreement, a management plan of that could be agreed as a planning condition. We are already seeking further ecological enhancements on the site. What method they form will be borne out through that would be borne out through that process. That could include planting, but if members felt that the green infrastructure offering at the site needed to be improved and there was grounds to improve that, then a soft landscaping scheme, again, that's an implementation of that and management of that, is a standard planning condition that is at your a gift that you could with your disposal if you felt that would improve the soft landscaping offering. In terms of the flight path and the other matters raised, like I said, the advice from our ecologists is not that further survey work is needed, it's simply that the scheme doesn't demonstrate ecological enhancement, and the suggested condition in the presentation would address that. In terms of air source heat pumps and solar PVs, no, none are shown on the plan at the moment. And as we know, under the current policy framework, we don't have the tools to achieve those. Properties do have extensive permitted development rights set out under Part 40 of the Town and Country Planning Act to undertake those work. But until the replacement development plan is here with us and its standards accordingly that we can have the teeth to ensure those sort of things are included, at this stage they're not, and there's no policy levers to secure them. But like I said, the property would benefit if it was built and granted. Air source heat pumps and certainly solar PVs are afforded permitted development rights to undertake those without grants of planning permission. I think in terms of that loops back then to the final sort of points raised and concerns raised in terms of reversing and vehicle movements. Again, it's the context, the sites and the volume of traffic and speeds of traffic balance with existing properties and their ability or inability to turn and leave site within a forward gear. Given the age of the properties, the parking offerings are, in not all cases, I haven't got that information, but there is lots of sort of parking, tandem parking. That's the context. Like I said, as officers, we've taken all that into the balance and feel that there isn't sufficient grounds there to withhold planning permission on highway safety harm associated with the movement of private motor vehicles. Ultimately, members, that's your balance, your judgment to make.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that, Andrew. Councillor Garrett.
I'm not sure if this is, I couldn't see a design and access statement. Is one required? Because that would give a bit more context to the site and the potential. I'm not quite sure what the purpose of the building is. It to be sold commercially on the open market, or is it for the use of the existing house as for a family member? But definitely design and access statement's not there. So I'd like to know why there isn't one, please.
Yeah, of course. The requirements for design access statements changed some years ago now. They were previously required for almost all applications. They now are only required for major planning applications. So the provision of one dwelling on a site of this size would not technically constitute the definition of a major planning application. So that's why that's not included. There is obviously the green infrastructure statement that is now required on applications. But that's why there isn't a design access statement. In terms of the use, in terms of its family member open market, it is considered on the basis that this is not an annex. It's not an affordable dwelling under that definition. It's a standalone, self-contained residential dwelling.
Okay, thanks for that, Andrew. Anybody else? There's nobody else on my list at the moment. Okay, in that case, can I have, we've got a recommendation for approval. Can I have somebody propose that we accept the application, Councillor McConnell, and a seconder, Councillor Butler? Yeah, and everybody understands that those further two conditions, the ones that were on the screen.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify? So the officer recommendation, as it stands, is for approval with those two extra conditions that were on the slides earlier, namely for securing ecological enhancement and for removal of certain parts of permitted development rights in respect of alterations and extensions to the roof. So that the officer recommendation is based on those two additional conditions. If members are minded to go with that, I mean, I have discussed the need for any landscaping conditions, but the recommendation is not that they're not required. Just to be clear, the recommendation is only with those two additional conditions.
So what you said about the soft landscaping, could that be conditioned as well?
If members were to vote on that, I just wanted to be clear for the purposes of voting and clarity. If the recommendation is for members to approve with those conditions, that needs to be explicitly set out. Say the officer recommendation is just for those two conditions. If members feel additional soft landscaping conditions are required, that's obviously within your gift to do that, but it just needs to be made. I think you want to be clear for the purpose of those following that that's what people are voting on.
Sorry, somebody coughed and I missed the last part of that. So do we have to condition that
Well,
now, or is that not possible?
There already is a GI condition in there, but up to members. But there is one there anyway.
Yeah, so just to be really clear, members, the recommendation is for approval with the two additional conditions that are on the screen now. If members want an additional condition above the two that you can see, then we need to have that specified from yourselves, but it is the officer's recommendation that that's not required. The two additional conditions in front of you are sufficient.
In that case,
can I just apologise to members? A, for the confusion that's perhaps caused on my part. If you note in condition 4 of the officer's report, that condition and its compliance with it as condition 5 is already there. So that's on my part for causing that confusion. It clearly was a justified condition we've included in the report. So for absolute certainty, the condition requiring additional soft landscaping measures, density numbers, location, etc., is already there. The recommendation is that's there plus the two on screen. So again, my apologies for any confusion.
Thank you for that.
Right, so on the basis of that, we've got a proposer and a seconder. So Richard, if we can Yeah, I was just going to say I haven't really got it. Yeah, yeah. I don't know how we've got responsive.
Chair, if you press on the view poll, it brings up the facility.
It's coming up then, is it? Yeah. No, we'll let Richard send it again, and we'll do it again so everybody's on the same page with this. So please don't respond on the previous one. Yeah, well, you can forget it and we'll start again. Right, we've got it this time, so can everybody do it again? No, please. We've got it. Yeah, Jane's come off, hasn't she?
One more vote.
Right,
Who hasn't voted? It's so close, we'll go
Yeah.
to a roll call now.
oh, we'll,
So we do that anyway.
yeah. We'll go to a recorded vote.
Okay. Councillor Bromfield. For or
Against approval. Against, that was.
Okay. Councillor Bryn,
Against.
Councillor Butler,
For.
Councillor Crook,
Against.
Councillor Eason, Councillor Garrett,
For.
Councillor Howells,
For.
Councillor McConnell,
For.
Councillor McKenna.
She's not.
Oh, okay. Councillor Murphy,
Against.
Councillor Powell,
Against.
Councillor Riley,
Against.
Councillor Rook,
Against.
Councillor Webb,
For.
So that hasn't been carried. It's 7 against, 6 for approval.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll move on to the next one after a short comfort break. I've got people asking if we can have a short break, so we'll return at 22. Okay, it's 22. In fact, it's 1 minute over. So the next one on my list is application DM 2024-00985, which is replacement dwelling at Bushes Farm, Chapel Road, Earlswood. Amy.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the presentation is just being uploaded, but this application relates to Bushes Farm in Shire Newton. The development description on the application is for a replacement dwelling. So the application has been presented to members on 2 separate occasions, and so I'm confident that members are fully aware of the details of this case. However, just to summarise, the application seeks planning permission for a replacement dwelling on the site known as Bushes Farm, Earlswood. The proposed new building is a replacement of the former agricultural building that stood at the site and incorporates 2 extensions, associated landscaping, an access track, as well as the required mitigation. So we'll just run through the slides. You can see the location plan here outlined with the main building in red and the bat mitigation in the smaller red triangle to the left. The next slide shows a close-up of the original block plan with the access. And the next is there was a site plan there with the proposed block plan. Let's keep going. And existing elevations of the building as it has been built as it stands today. Proposed floor plan with the extensions on the left and right side of the original building in the centre. A proposed elevation from the south looking to the front of the building. You can see the extension there, the flat roof extension on the left-hand side and carport to the other side. A few more of the photographs. That is the proposed elevation of the rear. The extension at the rear there is in the kind of black shaded area. And again, side elevation showing the glazed extension and the other side of the property, the east elevation. And then these show the phases, the top one being the building before any work started, the second one down being, and the third one during construction or reconstruction, I'd say on the third one, and the proposed at the bottom there, number 4. Existing building on site, it shows the blockwork inside and stonework cladding to the outer face. Again, the area of excavation to the rear of the building for the proposed extension. And again, the bank towards the back and a photograph taken from higher up showing the building on site as it stands. A caravan on site to be used in association with the construction. And again, more images of the site there. Again, the front of the building. And there we go. So the application was presented to Planning Committee on the 5th of November. However, due to a procedural irregularity at that meeting, the application returned to committee for consideration on the 3rd of December. At this December meeting, members resolved to approve the application against officer recommendation, and so the application is now before members today with the relevant conditions to be considered by yourselves. The conditions are set out in the top of the officer's report for ease of reference and relate to the control of permitted development rights, compliance with approved plans, details of hard and soft landscaping to be submitted, the implementation and maintenance of said landscape, compliance with the BAT survey and required mitigation, a construction environmental management plan, a long-term management plan for the sink, and requirement for SUDS approval. I draw members' attention to the paragraphs in the report relating to the offer of a unilateral undertaking to provide a financial sum in relation to affordable housing. However, as outlined in the officer's report, this would not be required under the current affordable housing policy and supplementary planning guidance, as the development is a replacement dwelling. No net increase in residential unit has occurred, and therefore no contributions are required. In addition, it could also be considered as a self-build, which is again exempt. If it was considered as a self-build, the applicant would be required to sign a Section 106 to ensure that the building, if it was sold within 3 years, then a financial contribution would be required. However, As the application stands before you, the financial payment is not required. Therefore, it is recommended by officers that the offer of the payment is politely declined and the policy followed in the same manner as every other application of this type. In addition, concerns have also been raised over the outstanding unauthorised work not included with the proposed plans or conditions. I can confirm to members that the unauthorised work will be addressed by a formal enforcement action if necessary. However, I'm assured that by the applicant that this will be rectified as a priority. However, if this is not the case, then our enforcement team will follow the relevant procedure to alleviate any effects of unauthorised work. In addition, there have been some concerns over the impact of the bat house to the neighbouring property. However, the bat mitigation has been considered by the council's ecologist and it is all considered acceptable. Please note in late correspondence that some of the plan references in the officer's report have changed. This was due to an administrative error and the plans noted in late correspondence and those before members today as shown in the presentation are correct. I also note that the plans or documents list in the report no longer includes the draft unilateral undertaking for the reasons I've already identified. The remaining details of this case remain unchanged from the last two committee meetings. Therefore, I refer to the officer's report with a recommendation to approve the application subject to those conditions identified. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And we've got the local member, Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The Planning Committee will recall that the application was approved by the Planning Committee at the last meeting and has come back to the committee to consider the planning conditions. At the last committee, I asked for this to include an affordable housing contribution, the removal of the small caravan and the removal of the temporary construction track and reinstatement back to Meadowland. I was surprised to see these three very important conditions were not included. The three conditions are caravan, affordable housing and track, which I find can be more easily remembered by the mnemonic CAT, C for caravan, A for affordable housing and T for track. Local residents have expressed concern to me that the removal of the temporary track and restoration to Meadowland has not been included in the conditions and the answer unfortunately appears to be enforcement. This is a track which covers 3 fields and it is vitally important that it is removed and reinstated back to beautiful Meadowland for its flora and fauna reinstatement. This condition should naturally follow on from the construction condition. In the same way, the removal of the caravan should be included as a condition. When I have spoken to the planning officer who wrote this report quite some time ago, I was informed that these matters were enforcement issues because they were outside of the red line of planning. However, the planning consultant for this application told me on site that conditions can be added within the blue line of the applicant's ownership when I mentioned the very strong local community concerns about the track. I understand from the applicant's agent that there is 100% commitment to these 3 conditions being added and no planning procedural reasons why they should not be. There are plenty of planning reasons which can be added to the restoring of the track back to Meadowland condition, including visual amenity, landscape, green infrastructure, improving flora and fauna, as well as the biodiversity considerations. This is generally considered as part and parcel of both local and national planning policy to have a net biodiversity gain. I have previously seen planning conditions include conditions on removal of caravans after the construction is complete, so there is no reason why this cannot be done. Everyone recognises the need for affordable housing in Monmouthshire, and to refuse it when offered unilaterally, even if the policy does not require it, does not make sense. Particularly to reiterate, the applicant's agent indicates that the applicant is 100% committed to adding these 3 conditions. Whilst the application cannot be made subject to the affordable housing contribution, it can still be a contractual matter. As stated at the last meeting, it is part of the democratic process that the Planning Committee can have a different view to the planning officers and part of its apolitical scrutiny functions. I would therefore strongly urge the committee to agree to add these 3 conditions to this planning approval to those that are already mentioned in the officer's report. And I'd like to speak after the before the vote. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Got nobody registered to speak. So Councillor Pell.
Yes, it's only just to clear something up in my own mind. Are we, is this being done as a new build in the country or as a replacement build?
So the application, the development description on the application is a replacement dwelling. So that's what the application is for.
Thank you.
As we have discussed previously, the building was there, it is no longer, and this is a new building. But yes, to confirm, the development description is a replacement dwelling that is exempt from any affordable housing contributions.
Councillor Easton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, this is the third time it's come back to us. The first two, for the reasons we know. The officers have given a good resume of where we are today, and I would support that we accept this application as it stands today. I think it will improve the environment, and I don't think it needs for much more debate. Councillor Brown mentions the 3 conditions you'd like added. I don't see any point in them to be added, because if these issues are not resolved, it could go to enforcement in any case. And regarding the Section 106 offer, which you politely declined, perhaps the applicants could find some way with the local community to do something for the local community centre. I would support this, and I move we accept it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Easton. Councillor McConnell.
Yes, similarly, I would support this. We've, as been pointed out, third time of talking about this application. I'm going to support it this time. We've discussed it. It's a democratic process. We came to a conclusion at the last meeting, so it's time to move on from that position. To move on, I am, however, I'm satisfied that the enforcement, should it be necessary, that is an adequate safeguard in that respect. And I would absolutely discourage us from considering accepting the equivalent of affordable housing contribution. And I think it's inappropriate to have money changing hands, albeit in a good cause, with reference to a planning application. I'm sure it's not made cynically, and I'm not regarding it as such, but it could be viewed as such. So that should definitely not, in my view, be a condition. So I'm in favour of it as it stands. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McConnell. We've got nobody else asking to speak. So I'll ask Councillor Brown to sum up.
Yes, I mean, I do, with regard to the particular, my main concern is about this particular track across the meadowland. And I would like your absolute categorical assurance that this enforcement will be followed through once the the building is constructed, because I did report this track in the summer of 2022. And, so I think you've got to reassure me that enforcement, and reassure my residents about this, because obviously there are planning reasons in terms of biodiversity and enhancing biodiversity. And I want your absolute categorical assurance that I won't be chasing email after email, waiting months and months or, years for enforcement to take place. The statistics that we have, the Performance and Overview Committee on this, aren't particularly good on the enforcement side. So I would like your absolute reassurance, both for myself and the local residents, that this meadowland will properly be restored.
Yeah, what I can say in relation to that, that the conditions, it doesn't meet the tests to put the conditions on to deal with enforcement. It is most appropriately dealt with separately. It wouldn't be reasonable to withhold planning permission without those conditions. What I can say is that we've already had that the applicant has committed to addressing these problems, and we would always, as through any enforcement, try and engage with the applicant and deal with things proper without taking any formal action where necessary. However, where we do need to, we will be strong and we will take that action. Any enforcement action would need to get approval from delegated panel, but I am sure that members here have seen this application a number of times. They all have raised the same concerns, and the head of my enforcement manager sat right next to me is very, very competent. Their team are very, very good. I would refute that the statistics aren't great. They're an excellent team and they do a very, very difficult job with the circumstances and the resources that they have. So I hope that gives you some confidence moving forward that we will be addressing these problems if we do need to. But I do have the assurance that the applicant sat there at the back of the room would be addressing these issues as a matter of priority as well.
Yeah, and obviously I'm hoping in good faith that happens in terms of this track, but I would like an assurance about it being expedited if that's not the case. Thank you. Sorry, did you say yes?
I think we covered that one.
Yeah.
Okay, we've, as we've said, we've been here several times. We are now looking at the conditions. The recommendation is for approval, but minus the requirement for the affordable housing contribution. So on that basis, Richard, can we have the voting function up, please? Oh yeah, we had a proposal. It was Councillor Easton, I think. So seconder, somebody said. Oh yeah, Councillor Howells. Okay, in that case, then we have the voting function up, so we can vote no, please.
That's been approved, 13 for and 1 against.
Okay, thank you, everybody. In that case, we'll now move to DM 2024-00442, which is the construction of 2 new dwellings at the rear of Ardwyn in Gwent Road, Mardy, Abergavenny. That one is being presented by Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Wait for the slides to come up. Okay, so yeah, this just to confirm, this is the a full planning application which seeks planning permission for the erection of 2 dwellings to the rear of an existing property known as Ardwyn. That property would be retained, and to confirm, the site located is along Gwent Road in Mardy. And just for point of confirmation, application is with you this afternoon, members, as the number of representations made in objection has exceeded the threshold of 5 households. So I'll just run through the slides now for any members that weren't able to join us on site yesterday. It's just worth a quick point. You can see in the middle of that larger drawing there, a small orange polygon that's showing a current and existing single garage that would be demolished to facilitate the access and provision to the new dwellings. Just turning to the next slide. So this is a proposed layout. So utilising the existing vehicle access, you can see the parking spaces there that would be for the existing retained dwelling, and then the 4 spaces then just above where the 2 two-bed properties. That's a total of 4, one policy compliant for each. And then they say they're both sat in fairly evenly apported plot sizes for both. And just to the next slide. So this is the dwelling that would be used for both single-storey property facing red brick, and as I stated, these are proposed as being two-storey properties. Sorry, two-bedroom properties. My apologies. Then just the next slide will be some photographs. So that's just showing the landscape and biodiversity enhancement plan. So 2 trees would be needed to be lost to facilitate the development, but that would be compensated for by the provision of 6 new native trees as part of the overall landscape and GI offering. That's the shared access there the cursor was just on, so that's just taking you down into the site. So that's the site as it is. That's the existing bungalow there on the right hand side of your screen. You can see there also the garage that would be demolished, say to facilitate the route down to the proposed dwellings. I think the next slide shows a slightly older photograph, but that's looking from Gwent Road down into the site from that position. And then there's a final one, I think, is a view looking up towards, there it is, up to top end of Gwent Road. You can just see the corner there of the existing building and a silver car parked in the apron of the access that would serve the proposed development. So just go through the material issues really. So the site again is within the development boundary, as I've said in previous applications, so within which principle of development is acceptable subject to detailed considerations. And as you have seen in terms of placemaking, we'll have noted on site yesterday, and is evident particularly from that last photograph in the presentation, the immediate built environment is characterised by quite a variety of house types, of finishes, of sizes. There isn't a sort of a uniform pattern there. And it's considered as offices that the design solution is relatively simple. And whilst there is a condition to agree sample of materials, officers are of the view that it would complement the existing development pattern along this part of Gwent Road. So both dwellings, as well as the retained dwelling, would be sited in appropriately sized plots that are commensurate with the surrounding environment. In terms of residential amenity, as stated, the dwellings would be single storey and therefore no upper floor windows would be present that could afford potential loss of privacy. And the dwellings would be sited approximately 21 metres to the rear of the existing dwelling, Ardwyn, and approximately 13 metres to the rear boundary at the bottom of the site. So the provision of these 2 dwellings is therefore considered to be something that would maintain reasonable levels of residential amenity of all neighbouring parties. In terms of green infrastructure and biodiversity, preliminary ecological appraisal has been submitted, as well as a green infrastructure statement, as is required by Chapter 6 of PPW 12. And as I stated earlier, 6 trees would replace the 2 that would be lost, as per the requirements of current policy. And in addition, areas of hedgerow would be retained. There's also provision for bat and bird boxes. So the development is considered to provide an appropriate level of information to inform a planning decision, and subject to the imposition of the conditions in the report, would accord with both local and national policy in respect of green infrastructure and biodiversity. In respect of highways, as I stated, the scheme would employ the existing point of vehicular access onto the carriageway with a shared driveway leading to the new dwellings. The site would provide policy compliant levels of off-road parking, and no objection is offered by our highway engineer. There have been some local concerns with regards to construction traffic during the course of the build. and these are noted, but you'll have seen in the report a condition is recommended to members for a construction traffic management plan to be submitted and agreed that would hopefully address those issues during the course of the building works. But post-completion, the provision of two-bedroom properties is not considered to represent an unacceptable impact on the local highway network, and the development is considered to accord with the requirements of policy MV1. Similarly, again, with regards to affordable housing, given the scale of development, both dwellings would be required to make financial contributions via Section 106 agreement, and that's set out in the heads of terms in the committee report. So, subject to those conditions and the signing of the Section 106 agreement, it is presented to you, members, with a recommendation for approval.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Councillor Lane has registered to speak, but I'm not sure that we've got him online. So Malcolm, if you're there, can you say something? No? No? Okay, in that case then we've got nobody else registered to speak. Does anybody wish to contribute? No, Councillor Powell. Councillor McConnell, seconded. Anybody else? Right, I'll go lining up now. Councillor Rook.
Just a quick question with regards to future development of the premises of the developments. Are we conditioning that restricting PD rights so that we can protect the amenity of the gardens next to the premises?
Andrew?
That condition's not recommended in this instance. Just to run through what the reason for that, but obviously that's at members' discretion if they feel a similar condition previously would be appropriate. So they couldn't put any windows in the upper floor of either dwelling that are within 10.5 metres of any boundary to the side of the property. So they couldn't do that under permitted development regardless. In terms of dormer windows to the front of the dwelling, that would be facing back towards the existing dwelling. That would always require planning permission. It's forward on the principal elevation of the dwelling. However, that would be above the 21 metre sort of guide. The permitted development rights that would exist on the back, particularly because that's the main point really, for dormers on the rear of the property. As I said, the distance to the boundary there is approximately 13 metres. We've had a lot of discussion today on matters of guidance and policy and standards. Typically, a habitable window to a boundary distance would be, as per that guidance, would be 10.5 metres. So we're already in excess of that. So the reason it wasn't suggested is you'd have to apply a planning condition where you felt it was reasonable and necessary. The site earlier, those distances were much less, and that's why that was suggested in that instance, whereas the distances here, as officers, we don't feel that there would be reasons to withhold those permitted development rights based on those distances.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chair. Just observations, really. Having visited the site yesterday, you know what I'm going to say. The trees, I'm very pleased to see that 6 new native species are going to be put in. The hedge at the boundary of the property is a Leylandii hedge, which is at the end of its life. I wonder whether the owners might consider taking more than 1 or 2 of those out, because I think they may become quite troublesome. And I don't think there are any biodiversity enhancements with those. Maybe think about replanting those. And I did notice actually there was an old apple tree that had gone over, I think, probably in the storm at the end of its life there. So I was quite sorry to see that. But every tree has its day, as it were. And my other observation is pretty much as I said before. You know, it concerns this as an opportunity for the owners to consider how they're going to heat these properties and whether they might use air source heat pumps and put solar panels in. So observations, really. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Pym.
Diolch, Chair. Some of the local concerns were for the loss of the southern boundary of this plot, which is apparently a wildlife corridor for birds, reptiles, hedgehogs and foraging bats. The number of urban specialist birds such as house sparrows, song thrushes, dunnocks and starlings have all declined and are now considered endangered. Swift numbers having dropped nearly 60% since 1994 and house sparrows by 18%, which some evidence attributes to lack of food in urban areas. Are we therefore able to condition the control of hard standing and outside lighting permitted within this site to protect some of the urban biodiversity that our wildlife rely on? And in addition, would it be possible, if this application gets approved, that we could use the 106 funding to provide a pavement on Gwent Road, which was another concern raised by objectors? Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Councillor Pinn. Andrew, do you want to come back on those?
Apologies, Councillor Pinn, can you just confirm that last question? I'll come back on the other ones then straight after.
Section
It was
106, provide a pavement.
No, I don't think there'd be the imposition of Section 106 agreement, similar to planning conditions, need to satisfy certain tests. I'm not sure that would. In terms of pavements and hard surfacing, some of the conditions we've already got include, just looking through now, the hard landscaping, including SUDs, etc., is covered by condition 3 that's already set out in the suite of conditions. In terms of lighting, I'm just looking through that now. If that's a condition to manage lighting so that any lighting is submitted to and agreed and is low level PIR lighting. If members feel that that's not been recommended explicitly by the council's ecology officer, but if that's a condition that members feel should be adhered to, then that's within your gift to add that as part of your decision-making process, to say it would be any lighting to be agreed in writing by us through discharge of condition, and to be low-level PIR sort of lighting that could be consulted on with the ecologist.
Okay, thanks for that, Andrew. Actually, from the point of view of the residents already on consideration there. So can I have a recommendation for approval, please? Councillor Butler and Councillor Powell, the second. We're okay on that. Right, in that case, we'll have the voting function up, please.
Sorry, we missed a little bit of that. Was this with a condition for the lighting? Because unfortunately the chamber froze for.
Yes, it is, Emma. Okay, can we vote now, please?
That's 14 for approval.
Okay, thanks everybody for that. So the last one is DM 2024-01199, which is a change of use from a funeral director's into a house of multiple occupation. And Amy.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, this application is for 90 Newport Road, which is located close to the centre of Caldicot. It is outside the central shopping area. However, its previous use was a funeral director's to the ground floor and a 3-bedroomed flat above. Given this position, the loss of the retail unit is not contrary to LDP policy RET4, being outside the central shopping area. The application proposes a change of use for the whole building to a 6-bed, 6-person house of multiple occupation, which is a C4 use. Being within the development boundary, a residential use is acceptable in principle, subject to the usual material considerations. The site plan, as you can see, shows the existing and proposed. The tarmac hard standing is for 2 cars to the front, and that should be retained as existing. To the rear of the garden, it is proposed to erect a timber fence to maintain the lawned area, with provision for 2 parking spaces beyond that fence to the rear. The application does not propose any physical changes to the exterior of the building. There are some internal alterations required to create the separation necessary. How this in itself would not need planning permission. The plans before you show the existing and proposed layout, as you can see there. And that shows all 6 rooms with ensuite bathroom facilities. So the next slide is a photograph of the front of the building to the left-hand side of the picture, showing the parking area to the front. And the next shows the buildings in context with the adjacent properties on its left-hand side. The next shows the rear of the terrace of the buildings and the parking for the other units. And the next slide is taken from the garden, looking towards the garages at the rear, and the proposal for parking spaces in that area. That garage is proposed to be retained. The next slide shows the access to the side of the building. Again, this remains unchanged and will provide a shelter for bin stores. They can be taken from the front elevation. And the last 2 slides show the photograph, show the rear elevation of the property close up. Concerns have been raised in relation to parking provision and highway safety. The application proposes 4 parking spaces. The parking standards require 3 spaces per bedroom for a normal residential unit. However, Highway offers considered that this HMO is slightly different and would prefer to see 6 spaces. However, Highway officers also note the location of the building being close to local amenities and public transport, together with controlled parking arrangements to the front. There are no objections from our Highways officers. It is also noted that generally the level of car ownership is lower for HMOs, and the parking arrangements to the rear do not involve high levels of car movements or greater speeds. It is noticed that the access to the rear is tight. However, parking is achievable, and overall Highway officers were satisfied with the proposals. Additional concerns have been raised verbally by Caldicot Town Council relating to the loss of a retail unit, additional HMOs in the area, and parking provision to the rear. These concerns replicate those of other interested parties that have also been received. In relation to the number of HMOs in one area, there are no specific policies within our LDP controlling the concentration of HMO use or any particular use in a location. In relation to the overall population of Caldicot and indeed the immediate area, the overall number of HMOs is still relatively low. Concerns are raised over the impact of HMOs, and any planning permission should not duplicate any other regulatory controls that we have in place, which are more appropriately managed through separate processes. Overall, the application is considered to comply with the relevant policies outlined in the officer's report and is recommended for approval subject to those conditions identified.
Okay, thank you, Amy. We've got nobody registered to speak on this one, but Tony, Councillor Easton, were you going to say something? Because the local member, Councillor Stevens, is
yeah, Councillor Stevens is not well. I myself and Jackie Strong are picking up bits and pieces in the ward, so I picked this one up. There was some question marks for Christmas because the town council were not aware of this application, and the officer realised that the county council weren't aware, and she contacted me, and that's where we picked it up. So the town councillors have been consulted, but not the town council. They were consulted individually, and I think they turned up yesterday morning. This application did cause some some concerns to local residents, and there were numbers of objections. Car parking was one problem where they considered that the car parking facilities were just not up to standard because it's right on the edge of the road. There's 2 spaces at the front and maybe you squeeze maybe 1 or 2 at the back. They were concerned about potential of antisocial behaviour and closer to the pub. There's also concerns of local residents about the sewerage system, which I think is still the old system 100 years ago, which may not have been able to be accommodated by the toilets that there was going to be put in there. But what did transpire yesterday is that this is a business proposition, not an HMO as people were expecting it to be. And it does put a different light on the aspect, because I understand one of the objectors has sent some correspondence in today where he spoke to the developer and he said it's going to be a sort of Airbnb type thing, which might put another question mark on the car parking if there's going to be 6 sort of business people there. But all in all, I think we need to move forward on these matters. It will bring hopefully some business to the town centre, to the town, if it's going to accompany businesses. So whilst I've got some concerns, I'm prepared to support this on the latest information that they've been given. If in the future it needs to change, well, it may need to come back to the committee to be discussed. So I don't know much more to say really other than that. But I think we've got to be careful, watch the car parking and just see what happens.
Okay, Councillor Easton, thanks for that. Councillor Bryn.
Hi, diolch Chair. My one of my concerns is that there doesn't seem to be any prospect of softening the frontage with a little bit of soft landscaping so that it'll continue to look like a business, like the 2 buildings on the left, rather than like a domesticated house, which is what's being proposed really, like the building to the right. And I would have liked to have seen some kind of change to represent its change of use. The other concern was, I know we're not allowed to comment on the lack of communal space on the inside, but on the outside, I couldn't see any designs for communal drying. There would need to be some kind of long lines because there's not a lot of amenity space at the back, and I wonder how these 6 separate individual households are going to practically dry their clothing outside, because there will be no space inside. But I don't know if that's a consideration for planning. Okay, diolch.
Thank you for that. Amy, do you want to come back on that?
Yes. So firstly, in terms of landscaping at the front, there are no proposed changes. It is proposed to stay as existing. Whilst it probably would be desirable if there was some enhancement to the front, we couldn't withhold planning permission. There wouldn't be a reason to refuse the planning permission because they're not making any enhancements to the front. They are maintaining the status quo in that respect. In terms of the drying facilities, probably is slightly outside our remit. However, there is a utility room proposed at the back of the building, just off the kitchen living area. So there is space for drying clothes, hopefully.
Nobody else on my list? Speak now or forever hold out peace. Okay, in that case, Richard, can we go for the vote? Can I have a proposal and a seconder, please? So, Councillor McConnell and Councillor Powell.
Chair, could I ask the solicitor whether I should vote on this or just sit back without the comments I made?
You're able to vote. It's entirely up to you.
Okay, we've got the vote up.
Yep, so that's 12 for approval, 2 against.
Okay, thank you for that. And that concludes the business. We've got no decisions from PEDU or anything like that. So remains for me to thank everybody for being a reasonably successful meeting. I think we've cleared up quite a bit. So thanks very much, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.